gonna swim, bike, and run in the Kona sun. We're gonna swim, bike, and run in the Kona sun 2021.
My name is Bob Babbitt. This is Breakfast with Bob. Not quite Kona edition. We are brought to you by Hoka One One Credo Tri, Four Seasons Walleye Challenge Daytona, Form Goggles, Canyon Bikes, Normatec, Amp Human VeloFix You Can, and of course, our Challenged Athletes Foundation. Right before COVID hit, we sent out 3,921 grants totaling $5.9 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. Our next guest, someone who is very familiar with Challenged Athletes Foundation. She's also four-time Ironman World Champion, 13 iron distance races. She went undefeated in her amazing career. The Ironman Hall of Famer, Chrissie Wellington. How are you, Chrissie?
I am really well. It's been a long time, Bob.
It has been way too long. I miss seeing you. I miss seeing you at the races.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year, isn't it? We haven't managed to connect with many people across the sport, or indeed many people, period. So it's great to at least be able to connect virtually.
Exactly. So when I tell the Chrissie Wellington story, I always say, Chrissie was trying to become an Olympic triathlete. She wanted to go to the Olympics. And then something happened. Her coach, Brett Sutton, said, I think you should go long. When he first said, I want to send you to Ironman Korea, what was going through your mind?
That first year, it was an interesting journey, Bob, because like you said, I started off thinking aiming to become an Olympic distance athlete. That was my focus.
Sure.
Ironman wasn't on my radar. It really wasn't something I ever aspired to do. And I knew little about the Ironman World Championships. And personally, I went through a journey in that first kind of 3 or 4 months of learning to trust my coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that incredibly difficult. And it was only when I really learned to trust him that I accepted his, instruction, we should say, that I should race Ironman Korea. I knew so little about the sport, so I really trusted the decision to him and didn't question it. If he thought I was ready, then I was ready. Had he said that right at the outset, I don't think I would have been as happy to have raced. But I think over the course of the first 3 or 4 months of working with him, I learned to trust him and his decisions, and found myself on the start line of Ironman Korea, not necessarily knowing what I was letting myself in for.
What I love is when people recognize a talent in someone else before that person recognizes it. Obviously, Brett saw something in you that you didn't see yourself. When you won Ironman Korea, did you start to think, maybe I am more of a diesel athlete. Maybe this is better for me? No,
there was a real sense of imposter syndrome. And I'm sure that many of the athletes that you've spoken to, and I've listened to Chris McCormack speak, and he talks of that experience as well. There was a sense that I had achieved success not because of my own talents and capabilities, but because the other athletes may have had a bad day. So that's how I rationalized it, whether it was my first Ironman win, whether it was my first World Championship victory. Yeah. I rationalized it because it wasn't something that I ever expected to happen to me. It wasn't something I ever envisaged. It certainly wasn't a goal. So to have achieved it, I think my way of rationalizing it was to think that, I'd done it almost by accident. Yeah. Because others had a bad day, not necessarily because I'd had a good day. And over the course of my career, set out to maybe prove to myself that I was worthy of being called a champion. But yeah, definitely there was a sense of kind of being an imposter and not having traveled. I guess that there's this perception that you need to have this rite of passage as an athlete, isn't there?
Yes.
And I just hadn't gone through that journey. So maybe there was a sense also that I hadn't earned it.
Well, because you think about it, you sort of came out of nowhere from our perspective, from people who've been in the sport. We didn't know your name. And when you came over to Kona after winning Ironman Korea, not very long before that, and you win the race and you go by some of the like you mentioned, the people who we expected to be up there, and you're smiling and laughing and having the best time and winning this iconic event. When you came across that finish line, did you have a sense that I think my life is changed here in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I think to your point about coming from nowhere, that's certainly true within the sport. I think every athlete comes from somewhere, and you're an athlete because of your experiences in the sport, but you're also built of all the experiences outside of the sport. So I was blessed to have gained physical and mental strength in other areas of my life that I then honed through triathlon. But yeah, you're right. As an athlete, I came to the sport and to the World Championships as an unknown. That moment changed my life forever, as it does anyone that is blessed to win the World Championships. Most importantly, it gifted me a platform, and it gifted me an opportunity. And the greatest gift that the sport gave me is relationships. If I look back at the sport, more important than any of the victories or titles or records is the relationships that I developed with my family, with my friends, with my support team. And that's what made the sport so special to me. You know, as an athlete, you race alone, but you never get to that start or finish line alone. And it was that shared experience that for me was so incredibly special.
Well, I think something you just mentioned was really, really awesome. And it's something that I always thought was great when we look at a lot of times what people's background is in terms of what they did in triathlon or what they ran in a marathon. When you go up to Nepal and you're up at altitude riding a mountain bike 1,000K, you are building that strength that helps you win the Ironman. When you go to a friend's wedding down in Argentina, I think, and decide, hey, we'll ride our mountain bikes to the wedding and carry my dress in my knapsack, and then decide, oh, well, we'll go on the honeymoon together. We'll go on the honeymoon and we'll ride across this area that's never been ridden across before, and we'll average 2K an hour pushing these mountain bikes. That is part of the magic of what made Chrissie Wellington so special, is you drew on all of that when you went to the starting line of a triathlon, don't you think?
Yeah, those type of experiences make you physically strong. They enable you to develop that psychological strength, and maybe to an extent they also give you perspective as to your own importance and what is important. And yeah, having those life experiences outside of triathlon, I think definitely made me a better athlete. And it's part of my life journey, Bob. It's one part of it. And I was so fortunate to have had the experiences that I did. And yeah, I think it definitely benefited from having all of those journeys that came before.
When I look at that era, 2007 to 2011, basically in 4 years, you never lose, right? You break you win 4 Ironman World Championship titles. You go to Challenge Roth and go 8:19 and 8:18, run 2:44 marathon off the bike. You accomplished so much in such a short period of time. You went from ground zero in our sport to the absolute peak of the sport, the most dominant person. And when you won in 2007, I think you won by 5 minutes, and then by 14 minutes the next year, and then by nearly 20 minutes in 2009. When you couldn't race in 2010, and you finally had what would be looked at as, oh my God, this was a downtime for Chrissie Wellington, the most dominant person in the world. How hard was that for you to deal with, not being able to go to the start line?
It's incredibly challenging when you can't do justice to all of your hard work.
Yes.
But I think that we're better athletes because of these problems, hurdles, adversities, not despite of them. So if you look back, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I had one of my best races, having not raced the World Championships, gone home, back to Boulder, healed myself mentally and physically, and raced Ironman Arizona and came back stronger and more determined. So it was a springboard for success. But every athlete has to face those difficult periods, and it's really important that we do, in order to gain strength and grow and develop. And leading into 2010, I had to take responsibility as well, and look at what I did do, what I could have done better with my team, and implement strategies to try and make sure it didn't happen again, and I was able to get to the start line healthy. But these things are part of a sporting journey. That's why sport is so amazing, Bob. It's, it's highs and lows, and like an Ironman race is the microcosm of that. You've got highs, you've got lows, you've got to learn to endure the highs and the lows. On the public face of it, I was undefeated at Ironman distance, and that much is true. But I certainly didn't win every race I ever entered, and some of those races were my biggest learning points. I remember a race. I was 2-time world champion, Ironman world champion, and I entered an Olympic distance race, Columbia Triathlon, and I approached it with an arrogance and a disrespect that meant that I didn't prepare properly, and I didn't have the race that I wanted. But I learned some really valuable lessons about needing to take care of the detail, needing to look after my sleep, my diet, all of those kind of smaller aspects of your preparation. But it really humbled me, Bob. And that was an incredibly important learning point. And I went on to win Ironman Kansas the next month. But, I really had to do a lot of introspection, a lot of honest self-reflection after that race. I had to lean on others, and also accept that things did go well as went badly. So when you're kind of reviewing a race, reviewing your performance, looking at what went well objectively, rather than thinking that just because you didn't do well, everything went badly. But yeah, so those times where you don't achieve your goal are incredibly important as a person and as an athlete. And I wasn't spared those experiences in my sporting journey either.
I remember chatting with you, I think it was at the award ceremony after your first win. And I think you understood right away that winning this event gave you a platform, that you could speak to young girls about the importance of sport and the importance of really believing in yourself. How long did it take before it hit you that you would have that platform and you had a bigger responsibility than just being an athlete?
Even before doing that race, I'd thought about what my motivations were, and was struggling with the selfishness of professional sport.
Yeah.
Because it's about you and achieving your potential, your capabilities, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. But I remember expressing this to Brett, and he said, look, Chrissie, within a few years, you'll be able to, through your achievements in the sport, you'll be able to achieve more than you could have ever imagined out of it. And I had those words ringing in my ears. So that's really what motivated me. It was the opportunity to use success in sport for the greater good. Of course, don't get me wrong, I'm very competitive and I wanted to achieve my potential, of course. There were other things that were motivating me and driving me forward, and that was one. And so when I crossed the finish line, I immediately vowed to make the best of the platform that I had, and use that responsibility, or to make the most of that opportunity, and take that responsibility of being world champion very, very seriously. And immediately, after the race, I returned to the condo and knew that I had to write a speech. And I'd never been to a world championships before, never had to deliver such a speech, never listened to one. And I really didn't know what I was supposed to say. And, joking aside, I didn't have sponsors to, to acknowledge or thank. And so I thought very, very deeply about what message I wanted to convey. And I wrote that speech with great care. And I think it was the first marker that I wanted to use the position to share some really important messages with people.
I think when you talk about the message and the message of empowering women, when we went into the 2011 Ironman, what was great about that was here you are, the 4-time world champion who couldn't race in 2010, racing against the defending champion. We're in the car frame. So you had 2 champions going to the line, which I think the women's race really got a huge boost from the fact that you had who's going to win, the defending champion or the woman who's won 3 times here. So did you feel that going in? And obviously you crashed 2 weeks before and didn't even know if your body would be able to make it to the starting line. But just the fact that the women's race was the showcase, how important was that to you?
In my mind, it's never a 2-horse race. The media might want to pitch it as such because those kind of
that's what we do.
Rivalries are really important, but in my mind, it's never a 2-horse race, especially at the World Championships. Bob, that race means so much to me, more than any race I've ever done, because in all the other races, my sense of self-worth was wedded to the outcome. So whether or not I'd won. And for the first time, aside from the 2007 when I didn't have winning as a goal, but for the first time in a long time, I went into that race liberated of that outcome goal, because all I wanted to do was to execute the best race possible, and liberated myself almost of aspirations of success, of winning, because I just didn't think that that was what I was capable of. And I think it was that release of expectation that enabled me to achieve what I did in part. And it was the race that I'd always dreamed of. Not because the time on the clock was anything special, but because it was that battle with all of those competitors, not just with Rinny, but with all of those competitors that I'd always craved. I wanted to know that I could win a race not leading from the front. When the chips were down, could I fight? And I proved to myself that that was possible. And then I also proved to myself what I was capable of, I guess, physically as well. And that was the race where I answered the question that I'd been asking myself, and that was whether I was worthy of being a champion. And that was such an empowering experience, Bob. Just to have achieved that, to have validated yourself as an athlete and as a world champion, was all I was ever looking for. And that's why I knew I needed to retire, because I'd answered the question, maybe the question that I didn't even know I was asking myself until I answered it. Does that make
absolutely?
It was.
I was chatting with Dave Scott the other day, and he goes, "Bob, you have no idea what that last few days was like going into that race. I mean, Chrissie really couldn't swim. She had rib issues. She had to have all of those wounds scrubbed out. Knowing what you dealt with, knowing that you had not been able to race a year before, would you have raced, say you had won the year before, coming in 2011 with those type of injuries, would you even have gone to the starting line?"
I would have felt less pressure to have started.
Yeah.
I think I had something to prove, but it wasn't necessarily with the goal of winning. It was to get out there and inspire others through a performance. Just through just through my participation. I knew I could race. And so I felt that if I could race, I should race. But there was definitely an external pressure and an internal pressure to do so, because I hadn't raced the year before.
Right. I remember being out of course with your folks, right, out by Javi. And I know they knew you were injured, but I don't think they had a sense that Chrissie's not going to be off the front waving at us. So we were out by Javi, and they were like, "What's going on? Who are these other people who are in front of our daughter? Who are these crazy people? What's going on?" So it was very interesting to watch you win a race in a different way, that you had to come from behind, that you had to win the race on the run when really you only had a couple minute lead off the bike. And then, the lead shrunk to about 2 minutes, but then you held it right there. Like you said, winning it that way, winning it when the odds were against it and you weren't thinking about winning, that made it one of the greatest races we've ever seen. How long was it from winning to the point where you thought, I'm done, I don't need to do this again because I've just had the ultimate race?
I spent a lot of time thinking about it, but the decision was immediate, but the certainty in the decision didn't come until a little bit later. So I made the decision, but then I kind of oscillated.
Sure.
But as an athlete, you can get very comfortable. You can, your sense of self-worth, your identity, your structure, your life purpose is shaped by triathlon and who you are as a triathlete. And it's very difficult to step out of that comfort zone and embark on a journey that is unknown, because I didn't know who I was if I wasn't Chrissie Wellington, 4-time Ironman World Champion. What would my days look like? What would my goal be? How would I gain self-worth? All of those things. So the easiest thing to do is to remain as an athlete, because you don't have to answer some of those really horrible, challenging questions of yourself, right? But that's also precisely why I needed to do it. And intuitively and deep down, I knew I needed to move on, that I'd answered the question that I needed to answer through sport, and the time was right to embark on a new journey. But fear can often prevent us from taking those steps, fear of the unknown, fear of what career we might have afterwards, and I was incredibly fearful, but also, knew that with the unknown comes a lot of opportunity, even if you can't see it. And as a professional athlete, you have to leave the sport at some point.
Yeah.
At some point you do. And we all have to make that choice. Sometimes it's chosen for us if we're in a team sport and we're not selected, or we have, more serious injuries that we can't return from. And I was fortunate to be able to leave on my own terms, but transitioning away certainly isn't easy.
So becoming a mom, and besides being a mom, and you've been involved with Park Run, you've been involved with so many different initiatives. Talk a little about what your life is now, and how hard was it that first year, that first October, after you retired? Was it hard not to be there in 2012?
It's really difficult every October, Bob.
Still is.
Yeah, because you reminisce, and in a way it's harder now because I realize how far I am from the athlete that I once was. So initially, in that first year, I thought, oh, wow, could I still go back there? Could that still be me on the top of the podium? And now, whatever it is, 10 years on, I know for sure that I probably wouldn't even make it out the swim. But so you reflect back on how much you and your body, especially your physicality, your fitness, all of that has changed, and you kind of have a nostalgia for the athlete that you were. So paradoxically, it's easier and harder at the same time. In the early stages, I had to be comfortable with not knowing what direction my life was going to go. And like I said, that's quite hard. I had the Olympics to keep me occupied. So I was really fortunate to be involved in that process. I'd written my autobiography, so I was involved in the promotion of that. So that was a useful distraction and provided, kind of a different focus. And then I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to work for Park Run, and now that is my main career, and then also keep one foot in the sporting or triathlon world through some other projects that I have. Of course, being a mom is a 24/7 job, and we spend a lot of time with our daughter as a family. So that's always been a priority. But yeah, in answer to your question, October, and every year when October comes around, it's difficult.
Sure. When you look back at your career, what do you look at as your happiest memory?
The relationships that I made, so being with family and friends at the finish line, whether that be of Roth or at the World Championships.
Yeah.
The celebrations with those that I cared about, memories that will last a lifetime.
What your toughest moment in your athletic career?
Not starting in 2010 was incredibly challenging, and leaving the sport.
When you look inside yourself, what was it about you? What is it about you that made you a champion?
I think it's a variety of different traits. I think it's difficult to pinpoint one. I wish everyone wants that kind of silver bullet solution to being a champion. For me, I know with certainty that it was a willingness to lean on others. I think had I not been able to seek the support of other people, I would never have achieved what I did.
Chrissie, thank you for taking so much time to chat. I love our conversations. They're always so much fun it's always so much fun to catch up with you. And I can imagine that your daughter is so much fun. I can imagine that there are certain times where you look at her and go, she is so much like me. She's driving me crazy.
Yeah. I mean, parenting is the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. And I'm learning from her each and every single day. And this year, more than anything, has taught me to really live in the moment. Children teach you to live in the moment. And this year, more than any, has taught me the importance of that, and just celebrating those small things and appreciating those smaller things in life. So yeah, I feel blessed to be a mum. She's my biggest teacher, and I I love having the opportunity with Tom to guide her and enable her to do whatever she wants to do in life.
Well, hopefully one of these years we'll get the family over here for our Challenged Athlete Foundation weekend. I think Esmo would enjoy meeting a lot of our Challenged Athlete Foundation kids.
And very important for her to have that experience and to see children and adults from all walks of life, and realize that no matter your disability, that anything's really is possible, and that's a really important for all a really important lesson for all children.
I agree. Chrissie, you are always so much fun to chat with. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for everything you've done to make our sport great. Having you, even though like a meteor, you came in for 4 years and just took over and just made everything great. I really appreciate everything you did to make the sport great. And the fact that you took time to come out for our Challenged Athletes Foundation event, really, you were one of the first pros to say, hey, I want to come and see this. I will always be appreciative of you taking the time to do that.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Bob.
Chrissie Wellington, 4-time Ironman World Champion and mom, has been our guest. This again is Breakfast with Bob, Not Quite Kona edition. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, Chrissie.